Going from that, we're going to a social media company, Snapchat. Now, Snapchat announced their earnings, and they were actually pretty good. The earnings per share adjusted, it was only 0.01, so it was 1 cent they earned. But they were expecting a loss of 4 cents, all the analysts and everything. Now, they actually acquired more users and more advertisers during this period. You had a lot of the advertisers moving over from other social media ones like Facebook and Twitter, and there's all this kind of stuff with how companies are censoring the information that is being shared on their social media platform, and a lot of them said they were boycotting ones where they didn't approve of their methods, and they were going to companies like Snapchat. So revenue was up 52% to $678.7 million, and that beat estimates of $557 million. They added 11 million users from the prior quarter. Again, people are stuck at home, they're not really moving about a lot of time spent scrolling through your phone. They now have 249 million daily active users, and those average users are using the phone 19% more. Shares, they gapped up on this news 20%, and the stock hit $35, up 74% so far this year. And the market cap is now worth $50 billion on Snapchat. It's pretty crazy with this. The revenue could rise 50% for the year. The third quarter loss was $199.8 million versus $227.4 million last year. The stock is at a new high right now. Now I want to go into something where you have a business that people see something and if you don't actually look at the details at the numbers, you can get caught up in the image of something and not realize that it might be a fraud. So speaking of this, we have Dan Bilzerian. So he basically runs kind of his own, he basically wants to be the Hugh Hefner of modern times. And he has about 32 million Instagram followers, and he has a business called Ignite. And basically what we found out now is that one of the people employed at Ignite, he quit the job, and now he's saying that they were basically using expenses for any of the Dan Bilzerian stuff as expenses on the business. If he would go and rent a yacht and be like a party yacht, and he would have $800,000 charge for expenses so that he can go and dance around with models. And he has videos of him shooting guns with, once again, all like beautiful models standing around him. And he's trying to give this image of like this beautiful life and everything's perfect and great. And look how I live. And he has Lamborghinis and this expensive house in the back and everything. And the reality is that it's not even his money. He originally said that he made about $50 million from gambling, from playing poker. But he was never, I think they announced that on the Joe Rogan podcast actually, that he made all his money gambling. But was that ever realistic? I mean, you heard that and you're like, that sounds kind of strange because I don't see you on the list of, the World Series of Poker as any of the top players. Most of those top players haven't made like $50 million that if they're not at the highest end. I mean, it was pretty crazy with that. And then you find out that his father was actually involved with securities fraud and potentially had a trust fund set up that the child, which is Dan Bilzerian, could actually use. So it's pretty crazy there what's going on. It looks like right now, after this company lost $50 million because of all these ridiculous expenses, including, ordering Instacart groceries to his house and stuff like that. Very, doing laundry and maid service and stuff like that. Now the guy went and fled to Armenia supposedly, and we're going to find out what happens with this. Is this just like is this going to blow it up and it's going to be a complete fraud? Or is it going to be like, okay, maybe this is a business that is just not making a lot of money? And you think about it, Ignite is traded. I think it's on the over-the-counter markets, but it's still publicly traded, and there's a lot of investors that put a lot of money into this. So if this is a fraud, it's on a pretty big scale here. So we'll have to see how that goes on into the future here. Looking at the European Union right now, we have a lot of debt being issued by the governments. They're looking to raise 17 billion euros in 10 and 20-year bonds to fund different coronavirus and COVID-19 relief programs. So the interesting thing with this is that if you look at Italy and Greece, which around 10 years ago, they were at the center of the sovereign debt crisis in Europe. There was I think the Greek bonds were paying like 17%, 12 or 17% total on the bonds from there. It was basically, they couldn't get funding. They had to get bailed out by the rest of Europe. Now, the yield for Italy and Greece is at pretty much all-time lows. It's pretty crazy. It's less than 1% yield on their bonds right now. And the spread between how much Germany, which has historically always just had one of the best rates in Europe for bonds, they even go negative sometimes. The difference between for Germany borrowing money and Greece borrowing money is the lowest since 2009. So that's pretty crazy that you're seeing this going on, where it was such a big deal 10 years ago where we thought the European Union could collapse. And now all these bonds are being issued. They don't even have to offer any yield. And somebody somewhere are still buying them up, whether that's central banks or individuals. Now, even if you look in the United States, if you look at the 10-year Treasury note, it only yields 0.796%. It yields less than 1%. You're basically giving your money away. Moving on from there, we have McAfee with their IPO. The original IPO price was supposed to be $20, but it began trading. It sold off a bit, and it was actually down 6.5% on the first day of trading. Trades at around $18.79. So not a great IPO showing for that company. That's basically an internet security company for your computer, and they have antivirus software. Looking at the Federal Reserve balance sheet, it inched up again. And when I say inched, it must be a really big inch because it went up to $7.18 trillion as of Wednesday. So this points to all signs that this is just going to keep increasing right here. There's nothing that would indicate it's going to be cut down at all at this point. The Fed added $25 billion worth of U.S. Treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. The new total is $6.56 trillion of those assets. Every month they are buying $80 billion in Treasuries and $40 billion a month in mortgage-backed securities. So this is just a huge demand side just going into the market right here, where you just have them buying billions and billions of these items. It's pretty crazy, and you can see the effects on the market, why yields are so low right now. We also had another big announcement that was all over the news, was that Tesla announced their quarterly earnings, and it was a blowout quarter. They had their 5th consecutive quarter of positive earnings. Their earnings per share was 76 cents per share versus 57 cents expected. The revenue was $8.77 billion versus $8.36 billion expected. So it was also good that they had their automotive revenues were actually up 42%. They still made $397 million from their regulatory credits, but it's nice that they actually were selling some cars now. They spent $1 billion on capital expenditures building these new factories in a bunch of different areas around the world. Now, they also did this stock sale earlier in the year here, and that gave them a nice cash buffer. They actually have $14.5 billion in cash right now, and that's the most that they've ever had. Now, remember, if you look, I guess 10 years ago or so like that, this company was on the verge of bankruptcy. They didn't know if they had enough cash. Now they did a cash raising by issuing new shares of stock. No problem. They made all this money, and the stock continued to move up from there. So by year end, they have the potential from the Fremont, California factory, the Shanghai factory, and Berlin factories to be making 800,000 vehicles a year. That's pretty big. So their actual number for this year that they're trying to target is 500,000 vehicles. And once again, a company like GM, they made 800,000 vehicles just in the third quarter. So you have to keep that in mind when you're trying to frame this. So people are still only buying the lower end models of the cars right now. They have the Model 3 and Model Y. Those sales were up huge, but the Model S and Model X are not selling that well, and sales are down year over year. 140,000 vehicles were delivered for this quarter. Elon Musk said this was the best quarter in the company's history. That's a bold statement there. Tesla was trading at like 13 times sales. The stock right now is trading more than 800 times trailing earnings. So there is a lot of good high expectations for what they want to happen here. Some of the things that were missing from the annual or from the quarterly report here, there was nothing about these robo-taxis that they announced were supposed to be coming out. Originally, Elon Musk said that this was supposed to be released this year. There'd be robo-taxis all over the road doing, basically what Uber and Lyft are doing. And the reality is there's no information about that at all right now. There's the full self-driving. There was some information towards the end of this year that was supposed to be out. But still, we don't have anything with robo-taxis. Another thing, the Ford Semi, the Tesla Semi, That truck was supposed to be coming out soon, but we had no new announcements around that. And also the Tesla Roadster, that was actually announced in 2017. And this is their highest end model, really a kind of like a hypercar almost. And this one hasn't had any other news about the production, the timeline, or anything like that. So there was a few key aspects of the report missing. But I mean, this earnings was so big for Tesla and it was making so many news headlines that there was a bunch of other electronic vehicle stocks. And these stocks are not even, most of these companies don't even have any revenue. They only have a prototype, if that. They're not selling any of the electric vehicles yet. But these other stocks were actually going up on the news that Tesla did so well. So you had stocks like Fisker and Hyliion and Lordstown Motors. I mean, there's a bunch of these stocks now that are going up just on Tesla's news. That's pretty crazy to hear. Next up, we have earnings from Chipotle Mexican Grill. So Chipotle earned $3.76 per share, which is above the estimates of $3.47 a share. Same-store sales, which is one of the most important things for restaurants here, that's the year-over-year sales growth, it was 8.3% it went up. That's a pretty big number right there. Digital sales tripled from last year during the same quarter due to the lockdown of the pandemic. Shares were actually down around 4.8% on the news. But if you look at the details here, although the revenue looks like it was good, they were getting a lot of business, profits were hampered because a lot of people were actually ordering the items online and having it delivered to their house instead of ordering in the store or the facility. And the cost of that, of paying for a delivery on the unit, it really knocked down their profits there. So that was pretty significant, and that's why their profits weren't as great as they could have been. Next up, we have the unemployment numbers. So this week we had 787,000 total people filing initial claims. Well, this is for the report that came out earlier this week for the week previous. That fell by 55,000 from the week before that. So we saw a giant jump in the numbers from the week before. It was like 888,000. Now we're at 787. So that was a significant decline. This is actually the lowest number since the pandemic started. This was the lowest weekly jobless losses, basically. So looking at some of the other information on here, continuing unemployment benefits are now down to 8.37 million. So that's good. It's still trending down there. Half of the 22 million jobs that were lost because of the pandemic have been recovered to date. So it was good news to hear that. On another note with this, we also have existing home sales are up 9.4% in September. So that's the highest level since 2006. Consumer spending was also on the rise. So we had a few big announcements there that were on the positive side. The airline stocks reported their earnings and they lost a lot of money. Southwest lost $1.2 billion. American Airlines lost $2.4 billion. United and Delta also, they had losses as well. And then Alaska Air lost $431 million. So the four largest carriers have now lost more than $25 billion since the beginning of the year. And this is why they are trying to ask for bailouts from the federal government. The airlines are kind of now putting themselves in a situation where they are preparing for a different world environment next year because they understand that this is going to have repercussions that are long-term. Next up, we have Coca-Cola, which had their quarterly revenue down 9% year over year for the third quarter. The company said they expected to see growth in China this year. And this is also hinging on a lot of the other information we had about China, where they're coming back now. And if you look at the quote here, they said basically China is more or less back to where they were. So this is yet another indicator from a company report saying that China is back to pre-crisis levels here. That's pretty crazy. Going over the crypto news, we had a big announcement that really affected some of the price of the cryptocurrencies. We had PayPal, which if you're not using a cryptocurrency and you're trying to transact online, you're probably using PayPal and Venmo or something like that. And PayPal actually just announced that they're now going to be allowing users to buy, sell, and hold Bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies. The other ones included Ethereum, Litecoin, and Bitcoin Cash. So this is huge news, and once again making blockchain and cryptocurrency go more and more mainstream here. Bitcoin actually went up several $1,000s on this news. You had it around like it was in I think 11 or 12,000, but now it hit $13,000 for one Bitcoin. So that's a 15-month high in the cryptocurrency. And looking at it from the larger perspective here, this thing got up to around 20,000 for the all-time high, then had a giant sell-off all the way back down to 3,000, 3,500. It is now back up to 13,000. That's huge. I think that's up like 75% for the year or something like that. And for the last item, another interesting thing here when you're looking about, there's the index and there's the S&P 500 and then there's the Dow Jones Industrial Average, and they have a certain amount of an average expected return that you can see. But then when you look at individual stocks, some stocks have these crazy returns. And I think a good example of this is what's going on with Zoom Video. So Zoom Video recently announced a new product called On Zoom, and that allowed users to basically create and host free, paid, and fundraising events now on their platform. So ever since the lockdowns and the pandemic started, a lot of schools and a lot of people and individuals, they're all flocking to use Zoom for some kind of face-to-face communication that's a digital face-to-face, where you're actually seeing the other person on the other side of the webcam or on the other side of the call. Right now, if you look at their year-to-date, how much money they've made, how much the stock has gone up in value, 735% increase. You compare that to even something like the market that can average 15% a year or something like that, or maybe 30% in a good year. This did 735% in 1 year. Now, granted, a lot of this has to do with the crazy situation we're living in 2020, but still, I mean, even if you look at the NASDAQ was up 31% for the year. So you can just see how one company can make these huge gains and kind of leave the general index in the dust. So that concludes all of the information for the big news events of the week. Tune in next time and we'll see all the other business news that happens around the world. Thank you.